Okay, so let's talk about Romanian deadlifts. It looks a lot like the conventional deadlift, where your feet are inside where your hands are. Your feet are more like underneath your hips and your hands are outside your hips. It's different from conventional in that you're not actually taking the bar all the way to the floor and letting it rest on the floor. And instead, you're just letting it come down to about the level of like below your knees, depending on your mobility and your flexibility. And there's a little bit of a bend in your knees so that you can get your hips back really far, which puts a lot of emphasis on extension and contraction in the gluteus muscles, the muscles in your butt. And what makes it such a great exercise for building muscle in particular is we have the target muscles, which are the gluteus maximus in the butt, and then also your hamstrings in the back of your legs. We're keeping those muscles under tension as they're elongating right towards the bottom. And then there's no rest. The muscles stay under tension at the bottom of the exercise versus when we're doing a conventional deadlift and bringing the weight all the way to the floor. So we're keeping the muscles under tension while they're stretched out as much as we can get them, especially in the glutes. Not letting the weight rest on the floor, we have to bring the weight back up, reversing the motion. So you keep the muscles under tension for a lot longer period of time with an RDL or Romanian deadlift than you would with a conventional deadlift, which makes it really great for muscle growth. It's also really good for training your endurance in the upper body portion of the deadlift because basically you're not putting the weight down, so your arms don't get a break either. You'll notice I'm using straps for this because I already did 6 sets of deadlifts earlier today without straps to test my grip strength. So I'm using straps here because I particularly want to be able to hit my glutes, my back, and my hamstrings with the amount of tension and the amount of weight that they need. And right now, if I tried to do this without the straps, I would not be able to hold the bar for the amount of time that I need to in order to get my glutes and my hamstrings fatigued. So I'm using the straps for that reason. But if you are hugely concerned with training grip strength, you might try doing RDLs without straps so that you can strengthen up your upper body. For most people, when it comes to the deadlift, this is most of the time when I train people, the number one limiting factor for how much weight you can put on the bar is not how strong your legs are, it's how strong your upper body is and your grip strength. Once you've mastered the technique of the hip hinge, usually it's the grip strength, how much can you actually hold in your hands, that'll be the limiting factor. So it is good to practice exercises like the deadlift without straps to train your grip strength. But then, if you're doing this for an accessory, after you've already trained your grip strength, it's okay to use the straps, in my opinion. RDLs are a really great exercise for learning and mastering the technique of the hip hinge. And that's specifically the hips going back and forth. This is basically all hip hinge with a little bit of knee bend. If it was no knee bend at all, this would be a stiff leg deadlift, or much less knee bend, I should say, would be a stiff leg deadlift. But the hip hinge is that motion of moving your hips back behind you. And that is such an important movement to master for everything, for squats, for deadlifts, for lunges. There's so many movements that rely on the hip hinge, and the RDL is the exercise for strengthening that movement and helping you to master it. Especially because we don't go all the way to the floor. You really just bring your hips back as far as your flexibility allows, and then you bring your hips back to the center. Just keep in mind, when it comes to the hip hinge, I know that the weight is moving up and down, but this is not an up and down movement, okay? This is a back and forth movement. It's all about your hips. So the best thing that you can do when you're practicing a Romanian deadlift is, once you have the weight in your hand, just lock everything in, squeeze your armpits, make everything from your waist up super tight and stiff. And then just focus your mind on your hips moving backwards and forward, okay? Back and forth with the hips, everything else stays locked in. Don't think about reaching the weight toward the floor. It's not an up and down movement, it's a back and forth movement. The weight just happens to move up and down, but the real motion is back and forth in the hips. Okay, so focus on that. Another thing that will help with this when you're doing your RDLs, think about keeping the bar close to your legs, like you're shaving your legs with the bar. We want to keep the weight as close to the center line of your body as possible. And at the bottom of the exercise, you should form kind of like a triangle. If I had shot this from the side, you would see that there's a triangle from like one side is my back, and then my arms, and where my hands reach is close to my legs. So it's forming a triangle shape. That's what we want to see with RDLs at the bottom. As we make that backwards and forwards position, you're pulling the bar towards the center line of your body. We're not reaching the bar forward. We're not reaching it down towards the floor, okay? That's my tips for RDLs.